The day was long and quiet, and the canyon spread before him like a sleeping giant. Luke Turner, a lonely cowboy with a weathered hat and tired horse, was heading home after a week of herding cattle across the dry plains. The sun hung low, turning the rocks red and gold, and the air shimmered with heat. He was looking forward to a quiet evening, a warm fire, and maybe some beans and coffee. Life on the frontier was hard, but Luke liked it that way, simple, honest, peaceful. He believed he had seen everything this land could show him. But that day fate had other plans. As he rode along the narrow trail, his horse suddenly stopped and snorted. Luke frowned and patted the animal's neck. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. The horse pawed at the ground and turned its head toward a shadowed spot near the rocks. Luke followed its gaze and saw something strange, a bit of cloth fluttering weakly in the wind. At first he thought it was just a piece of blanket caught on a cactus, but then he noticed something else. Movement. Slow, weak movement. Luke climbed down carefully, his boots crunching against the gravel. When he stepped closer, his heart gave a heavy beat. Lying there in the dust was a young woman. Her dark hair was tangled, her face pale and streaked with dirt, and her arm was wrapped in what looked like an old shawl soaked with blood. She was barely breathing. Her lips were dry and cracked, and her eyes, half open, looked lost between sleep and pain. Luke knelt beside her. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked softly. There was no answer. Her chest rose slowly, shallow but steady. He could tell she had been there for hours, maybe all night. The desert was cruel. A few more hours and she would not have survived. He pulled out his canteen and held it to her lips. She flinched, then weakly tried to drink. The water ran down her chin, but she swallowed some. "Easy now," Luke whispered. "You're going to be all right." He looked around but saw no horse, no tracks, nothing. Whoever she was, she had been left behind. He noticed a small beaded necklace around her neck, the kind he had seen some Apache traders wear. A thought came to his mind, but he pushed it away. He didn't care who she was. She was hurt and needed help. Without wasting another second, Luke lifted her gently in his arms. She was light as a feather, but he could feel how hot her skin was. Fever. He carried her back to his horse, tied his supplies tight, and mounted with her in his arms. The horse hesitated, but then obeyed. The ride back to his small cabin took nearly 2 hours, through rough paths and narrow turns. The whole time the girl barely moved. Once she whispered something in a language he didn't understand and then fell quiet again. By the time they reached his cabin, the sky had turned purple. Luke pushed the door open with his shoulder and laid her on his bed. His place was small, a single room with a wooden stove, a table, and a few shelves. He lit a lamp and knelt beside her. Her arm wound was deep but clean. He boiled water, tore a piece of his shirt for bandages, and cleaned the wound as best as he could. She didn't wake but stirred a little when the cool water touched her skin. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said gently. "You're safe now." He poured her another sip of water and left her to rest while he cooked some soup. His hands moved fast, but his thoughts were uneasy. Who was she? Where did she come from? And why was she alone in that canyon? When he came back to check on her, she was awake, just barely. Her eyes were dark and sharp, full of caution. She looked around the small room like a cornered animal. Luke raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're in my cabin. I found you hurt near the canyon." She didn't reply. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she turned her head away, staring at the wall. Luke sighed and sat in the chair near the bed. "You don't have to talk," he said. "Just rest. You're safe here." He watched her close her eyes again, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping, just pretending to. She didn't trust him. Maybe she thought he was one of the men who hurt her. Luke couldn't blame her. The land was full of danger, and trust was rare between settlers and native tribes. Still, something about her didn't seem like a warrior or a thief. She looked proud but gentle, almost regal in the way she held herself even in weakness. As night fell, Luke sat by the window, listening to the desert wind outside. Coyotes howled in the distance and the smell of smoke from his stove filled the room. He looked over at her again. The lamplight showed her face clearly now, young, maybe in her early 20s. Her skin was smooth but sun-touched, her hair black and long, braided on one side. She had strong cheekbones and a quiet beauty that reminded him of the land itself. Wild, fierce, and calm at the same time. When he turned away to add wood to the fire, he caught her eyes watching him. For a moment neither spoke. Then she whispered one word so faint he almost missed it. Why? Luke blinked. Why what? Why help me? She asked. Her voice was weak but steady. He smiled softly. Because you needed it. That's reason enough. She looked confused, like no one had ever said such a thing to her before. Then she turned away again and closed her eyes. Luke didn't ask more. He could see she had been through something terrible. It wasn't the time for questions. That night he barely slept. He checked on her every hour. Once she was shivering, so he covered her with his old blanket. Another time she whispered in her sleep, a name he couldn't make out. He sat back and wondered what kind of trouble she might have brought to his door. The territory had been tense lately. There were rumors about fights between soldiers and Apache bands in the mountains. The thought made him uneasy. If she was part of that world, trouble could come fast. When morning came, the girl was still sleeping. The sunlight crept through the cracks in the wall, touching her face gently. She looked peaceful now, her breathing calm. Luke went outside to fetch water from the stream. The air was cool and the sky clear. But even as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be looking for her. He noticed horse tracks far down the ridge, not fresh but recent enough to worry him. Back in the cabin, she stirred awake when he came in. He smiled, trying to ease her fear. Good morning, he said. You're safe here. Eat a little if you can. He placed a bowl of soup beside her. She hesitated, then slowly took a sip. Luke felt relief seeing some color return to her face. He didn't ask her name again. He didn't want to push her, but in his heart, he was sure she carried a secret, something bigger than just a wounded traveler lost in the desert. Still, he told himself not to care. All he wanted was to see her well and send her somewhere safe. As the day passed, he noticed how she watched everything, the tools on the wall, the rifle above the door, even the window facing the canyon. She was cautious, alert, and calm in a way that didn't fit her frail body. Luke had spent years among the wildlands, and he knew instinct when he saw it. This girl was no ordinary wanderer, but she was strong, even in silence. When night came again, she finally spoke one more word. Thank you, she said quietly, looking at him with eyes that held both pride and sorrow. Luke tipped his hat slightly and smiled. You don't have to thank me, miss, just rest. You'll be fine soon. She nodded, and for the first time her face softened a little. But deep inside, Luke knew her story wasn't over. Somewhere beyond those canyons, danger was waiting, and he had just stepped into it without knowing. The sun rose slowly over the canyon, spreading soft light across the wide desert. Luke Turner stepped outside his cabin, stretching his arms and breathing in the cool morning air. The night had been long. He hadn't slept much, not with the stranger resting in his bed. Every small sound had made him turn toward the door, half expecting trouble. Now standing on the porch, he looked toward the horizon. Everything looked calm. The distant rocks glowed gold, and a few hawks circled high above. But Luke had lived long enough to know that quiet mornings sometimes hid storms waiting to come. Inside the cabin, the girl was still asleep. Her face looked peaceful in the soft light, though her arm was still wrapped in bandages. Luke had cleaned the wound again before dawn. She had barely stirred, but her breathing was stronger now. He made a pot of coffee, fried some bread, and thought about what to do next. He couldn't keep her there forever. If someone was looking for her, they might come. And if word reached town that he was hiding a native girl, things could turn bad fast. But one look at her resting form made his heart tighten. She was too weak to travel and too frightened to be alone. When she finally woke, she looked around the small cabin like she was still unsure where she was. Her dark eyes met his, calm but guarded. You slept long, Luke said quietly. That's good. You needed it. She didn't reply, just looked at him as if studying his face. Her gaze moved to the window, then back to him. I made breakfast, he said. It's not much, but it's hot. She hesitated before sitting up. Her arm trembled slightly, and Luke quickly helped her steady herself. She didn't pull away this time. He handed her a cup of coffee, and she stared at the steam rising from it. Drink slow, he said kindly. It'll warm you up. After a few sips, she whispered something in her language. Soft words he didn't understand, but her tone sounded thankful. Luke smiled. You're welcome, miss. As she ate a little bread, Luke sat down across the room. He didn't want to frighten her by asking too much, but curiosity burned inside him. He'd found people hurt before. Farmers, ranch hands, even travelers robbed by bandits, but never anyone like her. There was something proud and graceful about her, even in weakness. When she finished, she looked at him again. "You help strangers," she said slowly, her voice unsure but clear. "I reckon that's what a man ought to do," Luke replied. She nodded slightly, still studying him. Then she looked down at her arm. "You clean this?" "Yes, ma'am." It wasn't too deep, but it needed care. "You lost some blood." She looked thoughtful for a moment, then said softly, "You good man." Luke chuckled. "I don't know about that, but I try." The words hung between them, simple but honest. As the morning went on, Luke went outside to chop some firewood. Through the open door, he could see her watching him quietly. When the wind blew, he saw her close her eyes as if listening to something far away. There was sadness in her expression, a kind of longing that made him wonder what she'd lost. Around noon, she stepped outside for the first time. She moved carefully, still weak, but she wanted to feel the sun. Luke watched her walk to the edge of the small yard. She looked toward the mountains in the distance and stood still for a long time. He noticed how her posture changed, straight, proud, and calm. She didn't look like a frightened woman anymore. She looked like someone used to standing tall among her people. After a while, she turned back to him. "This land," she said slowly, pointing at the canyon and hills. "You live here alone?" "Yeah," Luke answered. "It's quiet. I like it that way. Got a few cattle, a horse, and the sky for company." She nodded slowly. "Sky same for all," she said softly, almost like she was speaking to herself. Luke smiled faintly. "That's true. Doesn't care who's under it." The afternoon passed quietly. Luke fixed his fence while she sat in the shade near the porch. She seemed deep in thought, touching the small beads around her neck. Every once in a while, she'd glance toward the canyon trail with worry in her eyes. When evening came, Luke noticed something strange. A group of riders appeared far off, small as ants against the red hills. They moved slowly but steadily, heading down the same trail Luke had used the day before. He tensed, watching them through narrowed eyes. The distance was too great to see who they were, but he didn't like it. He stepped inside the cabin and reached for his rifle. The girl looked up quickly, alarm flashing across her face. "What wrong?" she asked. "Riders," Luke said quietly. "Could be nothing. Could be trouble." She stood, her hands gripping the table. "Soldiers?" she whispered. The word made him look at her sharply. "Why'd you think that?" She froze, realizing she'd said too much. Her lips pressed together, but her eyes gave away her fear. Luke understood then that she wasn't just hiding from thieves or bandits. There was more, something big. He sighed. "Listen, you don't have to tell me everything right now. But if those riders are after you, I need to know what kind of danger we're in." She looked down for a long time, then spoke quietly. "They kill my people," she said slowly, her voice breaking a little. "I run, they follow." Luke's chest tightened. "The army?" he asked softly. She nodded once, her eyes filling with tears she tried hard to hide. "They think we attack first." "Not true, I not tell who I am. If they find me, they take me." Luke set the rifle aside and knelt beside her. "You're safe here," he said gently. "No one's taking you while I'm breathing." She looked at him, surprised by his calm promise. "Why you help?" she asked again, almost pleading. "Because it's the right thing," he said simply. "And because I've seen too much pain in this land. You deserve a chance to live." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then she whispered her name for the first time. "Taya." Luke smiled softly. "That's a fine name." She gave a faint smile back. "And you?" "Luke?" He nodded. "Luke Turner." They sat quietly, both knowing things had changed. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was someone he had chosen to protect no matter what it cost him. That night, the riders didn't come near the cabin, but Luke could see their campfires flickering in the distance. He stayed awake, sitting by the window with his rifle across his knees. Inside, Taya slept restlessly, whispering words in her language, calling names he couldn't understand. As the firelight danced across the walls, Luke thought about her story. If she was truly part of an Apache tribe and the soldiers were after her, then trouble was already on its way. He knew how the frontier worked. Rumors spread fast, and fear made men cruel. Still, when he looked at her sleeping face, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a purpose. Maybe this was why he had been riding through that canyon. Maybe he was meant to find her, Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of drums, distant, soft, but real. Luke stared into the night, knowing that those sounds meant her people were near. And somewhere between the soldiers and the Apaches, he stood alone, caught between two worlds. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But deep inside, he had already made his choice. Whatever came, he would face it with the same quiet courage that had kept him alive all these years. As dawn began to rise again over the desert, Luke whispered to himself, "Guess the canyon had a reason to stop me that day." Then he turned back toward the cabin, where Taya slept beneath his old blanket, safe for now, though both of them could feel that the storm had only just begun. The morning air was cool, but Luke Turner's heart felt heavy. He had hardly slept again. All night he had sat by the window with his rifle ready, watching the flicker of far-off campfires on the horizon. He knew those fires belonged either to soldiers or scouts. Trouble was coming closer. When the first light touched the hills, he stepped outside quietly. The wind carried the smell of dust and sage. Somewhere a coyote barked, and the echo died into the wide silence. Luke stood for a long time, thinking. He wasn't a man who liked fighting. He had seen too much of it during his younger years when the frontier was wild and lawless. But this was different. Now it wasn't about land or pride. It was about keeping someone safe. Inside the cabin, Taya was awake. She sat near the stove, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of water. Her dark eyes followed him when he came back in. "You not sleep," she said quietly. Luke smiled faintly. "I'll sleep when it's safe." She lowered her gaze, guilt touching her voice. "I bring danger to you." He shook his head. "You didn't bring it, Taya. It was already out there. Folks just need someone to blame." She watched him stir the fire and add wood. The flames rose, painting their faces in warm light. For a while, neither spoke. Outside, the sound of horses drifted faintly through the canyon wind. Luke froze. He stepped to the window and looked out. 3 riders were moving along the ridge, scanning the valley below. They weren't close enough to see the cabin yet, but they were searching. He turned to Taya. "Pack what you can carry," he said quietly. "If they find this place, we ride." Her eyes widened, but she didn't argue. She moved quickly, wrapping her wounded arm in cloth and tucking her few things, a beaded necklace, a small pouch of herbs, into a blanket. Luke filled his saddlebag with food, water, and bullets. They waited as the riders moved along the ridge. After an hour, the sound faded. The danger passed, for now. Luke exhaled slowly, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll stay another night," he said. "But tomorrow we move before sunrise." Taya nodded. Her face looked calm, but he could see the fear hiding beneath it. Later that afternoon, Luke went down to the stream to fill his canteens. The sunlight shimmered on the water, and he crouched beside it, lost in thought. He had made many choices in his life, some good, some bad, but none had ever felt so heavy. Protecting Taya meant turning against his own kind if soldiers came. But letting her be captured felt worse. When he turned back toward the cabin, he saw her standing there, watching him. Her long hair moved with the breeze, and for the first time, she looked less like a stranger and more like someone meant to be part of his world. She walked down the slope and knelt beside him. "You think too much," she said softly. Luke chuckled. "Maybe I do. Hard not to with what's coming." She dipped her hands into the cool water. "My father always say, if sky wants storm, no man can stop it. But brave man still stand under it." Luke smiled at the words. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He is," she said, then paused. Her eyes clouded. "He was taken by soldiers. They say he start war, but he only try make peace." Luke's chest tightened. "Your father? He's the chief, isn't he?" Taya looked away, silent for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Yes. I am daughter of Greyhawk." Luke's heart sank. He had heard the name. Everyone in the territory had. Greyhawk was respected by his people and feared by others. The newspapers called him a rebel, but many settlers said he only wanted peace between tribes and ranchers. Now his daughter sat beside him, hiding from the very men who claimed to protect the law. "Well," Luke said slowly, "that explains why they're searching so hard." Taya's voice trembled slightly. "If they find me, they hurt my father. They say I run to gather warriors." Luke clenched his fists. "You're not running to fight. You're running to survive," she nodded weakly. "But they not listen." He placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. Then we'll make them listen, somehow. She looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his steady blue ones. For a moment, the world around them disappeared. The noise, the fear, the miles of empty land. Only the quiet connection between two hearts remained. They walked back to the cabin together. The rest of the day passed in uneasy calm. Luke worked on fixing the wagon harness, pretending not to notice the smoke far off in the distance. Another campfire that didn't belong to him. That night, they ate in silence. The sky outside was full of stars, bright and endless. Taya sat near the doorway looking at them. "When I small," she said quietly, "my mother tell me every star is soul watching over us. When one fall, it means spirit travel home." Luke looked at the sky too. Maybe she's right. "I've seen enough death to hope she is." She turned to him, her voice soft. "You lose people?" He nodded slowly. "Family, friends, this land takes as much as it gives." Taya's gaze softened. "Then you understand." "I do," Luke said. "More than I wish to." They sat quietly for a long while. The fire crackled, the horses snorted softly outside, and the stars seemed to listen. Suddenly, a distant shout broke the silence. Luke jumped to his feet. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Down the hill, 3 shadows on horseback were riding fast toward the cabin. Torches flickered in their hands. "Taya, get down!" he hissed. She crawled behind the bed as Luke blew out the lamp. The cabin went dark. The riders stopped just outside. Luke could hear them talking. One voice called out, "We're looking for a woman." "Apache, wounded arm!" "Seen anyone?" Luke's jaw tightened. He stepped to the door and opened it slightly. "Evening, gentlemen," he said calmly. "Ain't seen anyone but my horse in days." A torch lifted higher, lighting his face. The soldier leading them squinted. "You Turner?" "That's right. We heard someone was hiding out here. Orders say we check every cabin." Luke's hand stayed near his rifle, but his voice stayed steady. "You can look around outside all you want. Ain't no one here but me." The soldier stared at him for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "Fine, but if you see her, report it. The chief's daughter's worth more trouble than she's worth mercy." Luke's eyes hardened. "If I see her, I'll remember that," he said quietly. The men turned and rode off into the darkness. Luke waited until their torches were small dots on the horizon before shutting the door. His breath came heavy. Taya crawled out from her hiding place, shaking. "They close," she whispered. "Too close," Luke replied. "We can't stay here anymore. At first light, we ride north." She nodded, fear and trust mixing in her eyes. When the sun rose again, they packed quickly and left the cabin behind. Luke looked back once, the smoke from his chimney curling up for the last time. He had built that cabin with his own hands, plank by plank. Now he was leaving it to save someone he barely knew, but somehow cared for deeply. They rode through the canyon in silence. The desert spread wide around them, endless and quiet except for the sound of the horses' hooves. Luke led the way, scanning every ridge for movement. As they climbed higher into the hills, Taya turned in her saddle and looked back. The cabin was gone from sight. She whispered something in her language, a soft farewell to the place that had saved her life. Luke glanced at her. "What did you say?" She smiled faintly. "I thank the wind. It carried me to you." Luke said nothing, but her words stayed with him long after. By the time the sun set again, they reached a narrow canyon where the rocks glowed like fire. Luke built a small fire behind a ridge hidden from view. They sat close for warmth, listening to the coyotes sing in the distance. "We'll reach safer ground by tomorrow," Luke said. "Maybe there's a trader station past the ridge. We can get supplies." Taya nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Luke," she said softly. "You good man. My people remember good men." He smiled a little, shaking his head. "Just doing what's right, Taya." But deep inside he knew it wasn't that simple anymore. Somewhere along the road, protecting her had become more than duty. It had become something his heart refused to let go of. And though the desert night looked peaceful, Luke knew this was only the beginning. The soldiers would not stop. And before long, both their worlds would collide right in the middle of that canyon where their fates had first crossed. The desert wind blew cold that morning as Luke Turner led the horses through a narrow pass. Dust rose behind them, golden in the sunlight. The sound of hooves echoed against the canyon walls. They had been riding since dawn, heading north toward the old trading post that lay near the river bend. Luke hoped they could rest there, Maybe find food and shelter for a few days before deciding their next move. Taya rode beside him quietly. Her face was calm, but he could see the tiredness in her eyes. Her wound had reopened a little during the rough ride, and she was holding her arm close to her chest. Luke slowed his horse and looked at her with concern. "You holding up, Taya?" She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I strong," she said softly. He nodded back. "I know you are, but we'll stop soon. You need rest." She didn't argue. She just looked at the horizon, where the red rocks faded into the endless sky. The hours passed in silence until they reached a dry stream bed. Luke dismounted and motioned for her to do the same. He led the horses to a patch of grass that had somehow survived the sun. "We'll rest here a while," he said. Taya sat on a flat rock while Luke gathered dry branches. He built a small fire, just enough to heat water and keep the chill away. When he looked up, he saw her staring at the smoke rising into the sky. There was sadness in her eyes, the kind that went deeper than words. "You're thinking about your people," Luke said quietly. She nodded slowly. "I think of my father. He not know if I live. He think I gone." Luke poked the fire with a stick. "We'll find a way to get word to him." "I promise." Taya looked at him, her voice trembling a little. "You risk your life for me. You owe me nothing." Luke gave a small smile. "Maybe not, but I reckon I'd rather live with trouble than live knowing I turned my back on someone who needed me." Her eyes softened. She looked at him for a long moment, and in that quiet, something unspoken passed between them. Something that didn't need words. But peace never lasted long in the desert. By late afternoon, the sound of distant gunfire broke the stillness. Luke's head snapped up. He rose to his feet, scanning the hills. 3 quick shots echoed, then silence. He grabbed his rifle and crouched low. "Stay down," he whispered. Taya did as he said, hiding behind a boulder. Luke moved up the slope, keeping close to the rocks. When he reached the ridge, he saw them. 5 riders in army coats kicking up dust as they crossed the lower canyon. They were following tracks. His tracks. He hurried back to Taya. "They found our trail," he said. "We move now." They mounted quickly and rode hard, weaving between the canyon walls. The sound of hooves behind them grew louder. Taya clung to her reins, her hair flying in the wind. Luke looked back once. Dust clouds were closing in. He turned sharply left into a narrow cut between the rocks. The path twisted sharply, barely wide enough for 2 horses. "Hold on!" he shouted. They raced through the pass, stones flying beneath the hooves. When they burst out onto the open plain, Luke spotted a cluster of tall boulders ahead. "There!" he pointed. They rode behind them and stopped, hearts pounding. The soldiers' shouts echoed nearby. Luke dismounted and pulled his rifle free. "Stay low," he told her. He climbed one of the rocks and peered over. The soldiers had split up, 3 moving along the ridge, 2 circling below. They were sweeping the area, careful and slow. Luke aimed his rifle but didn't shoot, not yet. Killing one would bring the rest running. He needed to think. Suddenly, one of the horses below neighed sharply. The soldiers stopped. Luke realized too late that his own horse's tracks led straight to where they were hiding. He jumped down. "They found us," he whispered. "Follow me." "We go on foot." Taya followed as they climbed higher into the rocks. The ground was rough, the air hot and dry. The sound of boots and voices grew closer. Luke motioned for her to hide behind a large stone while he stayed a few feet away, rifle ready. The soldiers came into view, scanning the rocks. One of them pointed toward the boulder where Taya hid. Luke's heart stopped. Before they could move closer, Luke fired a warning shot into the air. The sound thundered through the canyon. "That's far enough," he shouted. The men froze. "You again, Turner," one of them yelled back. "You're harboring the chief's daughter." "Hand her over." Luke's voice rang strong. "She's hurt." "She's done nothing wrong." "She's an enemy," the soldier shouted. Luke's jaw clenched. "She's a human being." Then gunfire broke out. Bullets hit the rocks around them, sending dust flying. Luke returned fire, keeping the soldiers back. Taya crawled to his side, her eyes wide with fear. "Luke, you hurt?" she whispered. He shook his head. "I'm fine. Stay down." The fight raged for minutes that felt like hours. Luke's rifle cracked again and again. When his last bullet fired, silence followed. The soldiers shouted orders, then retreated to regroup. Luke leaned back against the rock, breathing hard. "We can't stay here," he said. Taya nodded, trembling. You saved me again. He looked at her, his face serious. I'll keep doing it. But we've got to move now before they return with more. They climbed higher into the hills until they reached a hidden cave. It was small, cool, and dark inside. Luke led the horses to a shaded area nearby and returned to the cave. Taya sat near the entrance, her face pale. Luke tore a strip from his shirt and cleaned a cut on her arm. You'll be fine, he said softly. Her eyes met his. They not stop, Luke. They want me dead. He paused, looking into her eyes. Then they'll have to come through me first. The courage in his voice made her heart ache. She turned her face away to hide her tears. As night fell, the desert turned cold. Luke built a small fire deep inside the cave. The orange light flickered across the stone walls. Outside, coyotes howled under a sky full of stars. Taya sat beside the fire, her head resting on her knees. You could have left me, she said quietly. You could have lived free. Luke smiled faintly. Freedom's not worth much if you can't look yourself in the mirror. Besides, he added softly, I think fate meant for me to find you that day. She looked at him through the firelight. My people say all things happen under the eye of the Great Spirit. Maybe he sent you. Luke's gaze softened. Maybe he did. The wind blew through the cave entrance, carrying the scent of rain. Thunder rumbled far away. Taya closed her eyes, listening. Rain is blessing, she said. Luke nodded. Then we could use one. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, lightning flashed across the canyon. When dawn came, the storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean. Luke stepped outside, scanning the horizon. There were no riders in sight, but he knew they weren't safe yet. He turned back into the cave. Taya was awake, watching him. We move again? She asked. Yes, he said. We'll head east toward the river. Maybe we can find your people. Maybe we can end this running. She stood and nodded. I trust you, Luke Turner. He smiled. Then let's finish what we started. They packed quickly and rode out as the first rays of sunlight touched the canyon. Behind them, the land was quiet again, but Luke knew the peace wouldn't last. Somewhere out there, the soldiers were still hunting. And soon both sides, the army and the Apache, would cross paths again. When that happened, Luke knew he'd have to stand in the middle, between two worlds that hated each other, fighting for the one thing he believed in, justice. And as the sun rose higher over the desert, his heart carried a silent vow. He would see Taya safe no matter the cost. The early sun rose like fire over the canyon. The air was cool, but Luke Turner felt the heat of a long journey pressing on his shoulders. He and Taya had ridden since dawn, following a faint trail that led toward the river valley. The land stretched endless and golden before them, quiet except for the sound of hooves and the whisper of wind across dry grass. Luke's eyes scanned the horizon again and again. The army patrols had stopped chasing them for a while, but he knew it wouldn't last. The soldiers wouldn't give up easily, not when they believed they were after a chief's daughter. Still, hope flickered in his chest. If they could reach the river, maybe they could find a path into Apache land where her people might still be hiding. Taya rode beside him, her face calm, though her eyes showed worry. Her wound had mostly healed, and she sat straighter now, her long hair blowing behind her in the wind. You think we near? She asked softly. Close, Luke said. Once we cross that ridge, we'll see the valley. The river should be there, she nodded. My father's camp once near the river. If he's free, he go there. Luke glanced at her. And if he's not? She looked down, her voice low. Then I find him or die trying. Luke said nothing for a moment. He respected her courage, but he also knew how dangerous it was. Still, deep down, he admired her strength, the same strength that had kept her alive through pain and fear. As the day grew hotter, they reached the ridge and stopped. From the top, the world opened wide before them. The river sparkled below, winding through a green valley that looked like a ribbon of life in the middle of endless desert. Smoke rose faintly from far-off fires. Taya's heart jumped. That's smoke, my people, she whispered. Luke shaded his eyes with his hand. Could be, but we can't just ride straight in. We need to be sure. They guided their horses down slowly, keeping close to the rocks. When they were halfway to the valley floor, Luke heard it, a distant rumble of hooves too steady to be wild horses. He froze. Taya noticed his look. What is it? He didn't answer right away. Then the sound grew louder, and from behind a ridge came a line of riders, soldiers, at least a dozen of them moving fast. Dust billowed behind their horses like a storm. Luke cursed under his breath. They found us. Taya's face paled. We run? He looked at the open valley below. No place to hide out there. We stand here. He jumped down, pulling his rifle free. Get behind that rock, he said firmly. Stay low. No matter what happens, don't come out. Taya shook her head. No, I stay with you. Luke looked at her, strong, defiant, unafraid. He wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The soldiers were closing in. He loaded his rifle and took position. The first shots rang out. Dust flew from the rocks around them. Luke returned fire, hitting one horseman's saddle. The man fell, rolling into the dirt. The others spread out, firing back. Taya crawled closer and picked up one of the spare rifles. Luke turned, surprised. You know how to shoot? She nodded, eyes steady. My father teach me. Then make him proud, Luke said. Together they held their ground. The air filled with the echo of gunfire and the smell of dust and gunpowder. The soldiers shouted orders, but Luke's aim was true. 2 more horses went down and the others slowed their charge. After a moment, the canyon fell quiet again. Luke used the pause to reload. Sweat dripped down his neck. They'll try to circle us, he said. Before he could move, a voice called out from below. Turner, you can't win this. Hand over the girl and we'll let you go. Luke leaned out from behind the rock. You think I'd believe that? The voice replied coldly. She's an Apache. You're harboring the enemy. You'll hang for it. Luke's voice was calm but sharp. If that's the cost for saving an innocent, I'll pay it. The reply came as another shot. A bullet grazed the rock near his head. Luke fired back, the blast echoing through the canyon. The fight dragged on until both sides were low on bullets. Dust and smoke hung heavy in the air. Then a new sound cut through the chaos. A horn, sharp and clear. Everyone froze. From the far side of the valley, another group of riders appeared, moving fast. But these weren't soldiers. Their horses were painted, their spears tipped with feathers. The sun glinted off bronze jewelry and bows. Taya gasped. My people. Luke looked at her. You sure? Yes, she whispered, her eyes wide. That is my father's mark. The soldiers turned in panic, realizing they were trapped between 2 sides. The Apache riders swept in like a storm. Arrows flew. Horses reared. The ground shook beneath them. Luke pulled Taya close and covered her as the clash exploded below. He had seen battles before, but this one was different. It was wild, raw, and full of desperate courage. When the dust began to clear, the soldiers were retreating, fleeing back down the canyon. A few Apache warriors chased them, but soon stopped. Silence fell again, broken only by the wind. Taya stood slowly, her eyes fixed on a tall figure riding toward them. A man with gray streaks in his hair and an eagle feather tied to his braid. His face was lined with years of wisdom and pain. When he dismounted, Taya ran forward. Father, she cried. Chief Greyhawk caught her in his arms, holding her tight. His strong voice trembled as he spoke in his native tongue. Then he turned to Luke, his eyes studying him carefully. You are the man who saved my daughter, he said in deep accented English. Luke nodded. I found her wounded. Just did what anyone decent would do. The chief shook his head. No, many would have left her. You are a man of honor. Taya looked between them, her face glowing with emotion. He protect me. He fight soldiers for me. The chief placed his hand on Luke's shoulder. You have done what few white men would. My people will not forget this. Luke felt awkward under the praise. Just glad she's safe now. The chief looked toward the horizon where smoke from the battle still rose. Safe for now. But peace is fragile, Luke nodded. Maybe peace needs people on both sides willing to protect it. The chief smiled faintly. You speak truth, Cowboy. Later that evening, the Apache camped by the river. They offered food and rest. Luke sat near the fire, watching Taya laugh softly with the women of her tribe. Her face looked alive again, her spirit unbroken. When she came to him, the firelight danced in her eyes. You stay with us? She asked quietly. Luke shook his head. No, Taya, this is your home. Mine's out there, somewhere between the hills and the sky. Her smile faded. Then this goodbye. He looked at her for a long moment. For now. But I'll remember you every time I see the canyon. She took off a beaded bracelet from her wrist and placed it in his hand. For you. So you not forget. He held it carefully. I won't. The next morning, the sun rose bright and gold over the valley. Luke saddled his horse and looked back one last time. Taya stood by the river, watching him with a soft smile. Her father stood beside her, nodding in respect. Luke tipped his hat and rode away, the sound of hooves fading into the wind. The desert stretched before him, wide and endless, but his heart was light. He had walked through danger, found courage, and seen kindness in a world divided by fear. As the canyon walls closed around him once more, he touched the beaded bracelet on his wrist and smiled. Somewhere behind him, the daughter of the Apache chief was safe, and for Luke Turner, that was enough. He rode on toward the horizon, a lone cowboy with the rising sun at his back and the memory of a brave girl forever in his heart.